For over 2 centuries, this lighthouse has watched over the endless sea. But its light didn't just guide ships. It led 203 souls to their death. Tonight, we uncover the curse behind the world's most haunted lighthouse. What if everything you've been told about maritime disasters is wrong? What if the cursed waters and mysterious shipwrecks that fascinate us today weren't natural disasters at all? What if they were murders, systematic, deliberate murders, carried out by a single family over 200 years, right under civilization's nose? This is the story of the lighthouse keeper family, and how they perfected the art of killing without leaving evidence. Between 1787 and 1987, exactly 200 years, ships kept disappearing near Beacon Island Lighthouse. So many ships that maritime insurance companies labeled it the Cursed Waters. Captains refused to sail near it. Shipping routes changed to avoid it, but the ships kept sinking anyway. The death toll reached 203 people, and all the bodies washed ashore on the same island, where the lighthouse keeper's family lived, where they buried the treasure salvaged from the wrecks, where they built their entire fortune on catastrophe. But here's what makes this story different from any other maritime mystery. Someone finally found the evidence. In 1987, marine archaeologist Dr. Samuel Whitmore discovered something that would rewrite maritime history, and what he found beneath the waves would answer a question that had puzzled historians for 2 centuries. Why did ships keep sinking in the exact same location, in the exact same way, for exactly 200 years? The answer was both terrifying and brilliant, because the shipwrecks weren't accidents. They were a business model. If you're fascinated by mysteries that have been hidden in plain sight for centuries, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because the story you're about to hear was deliberately concealed and only recently discovered. Beacon Island Lighthouse sits on a rocky outcrop approximately 40 miles off the coast of Scotland. The island itself is small, barely 3 acres. The waters surrounding it are treacherous, filled with jagged rocks, unpredictable currents, and fog that can appear without warning. For centuries, this location was avoided by sailors. Maritime charts from the 1600s and 1700s show that experienced captains deliberately steered away from Beacon Island. The waters around it had a reputation for danger. But in 1787, something changed. A lighthouse was built on Beacon Island. This was meant to be a solution, a navigational aid to help ships safely pass the dangerous waters. Instead, more ships started sinking. Historical records show that between 1787 and 1850, approximately 34 ships were wrecked in the waters around Beacon Island. All 34 wrecks occurred within a specific area, within 2 miles of the lighthouse. None occurred on the exposed rocks where the lighthouse beam didn't reach. They all occurred in the exact area where the light was supposed to be guiding ships safely. Insurance companies began refusing to cover ships passing near Beacon Island. Shipping routes were deliberately changed to avoid the location. The waters became known throughout Europe as the Cursed Waters, a place where even careful captains couldn't guarantee safe passage. Between 1850 and 1900, another 26 ships were wrecked in the same area. Maritime folklore developed. There were stories of sirens luring ships to their doom, of sea creatures attacking vessels, of a curse placed on the island by ancient peoples. What no one considered was the possibility that the wrecks weren't caused by nature or supernatural forces. What no one suspected was that someone was deliberately sinking the ships. Between 1900 and 1987, another 13 ships were documented as wrecked in the same area. That's 73 major wrecks over exactly 200 years, in the exact same location, in the exact same way. The Beacon Island Lighthouse was established in 1787, and from that year until 1987, exactly 200 years, the position of lighthouse keeper remained in the same family. The first lighthouse keeper was James Aldrich, Official records show very little about him. He appears in documents only as the keeper hired to maintain the light. In 1790, a woman appeared on the island. Her name was Margaret Sinclair. She was hired as domestic staff. They had children, several of them, and then something interesting happened. The records stopped. After 1795, there are almost no official documents recording the family's existence. No census information, no tax records. The family seems to have simply disappeared from bureaucratic record while remaining as lighthouse keepers. What historians did find was this: James Aldrich had a son, John Aldrich, who became keeper after his father. John had a son, William Aldrich, who became keeper. William had a son, James Aldrich II, who became keeper. James II had a son, Robert Aldrich, who became keeper. And Robert had a son, Michael Aldrich, who was the final keeper when the lighthouse was automated in 1987. 5 generations, exactly 200 years, same family, same location. What's remarkable is that lighthouse keeper positions were not typically hereditary. Keepers were hired by maritime authorities, trained, and assigned. They could be transferred, dismissed, or replaced. For one family to maintain a position across 5 generations, across 200 years, would require either extraordinary luck or extraordinary connections, or something else entirely. In 1987, marine archaeologist Dr. Samuel Whitmore was studying 18th and 19th century maritime disasters when he noticed something that previous researchers had apparently overlooked. Every major shipwreck documented in the Beacon Island area occurred within a specific window of time, between midnight and 4 a.m. Every single documented wreck. Not a single major wreck occurred during daylight hours. Whitmore found 34 documented wrecks from the 18th century, 26 from the 19th century, and 12 from the early 20th century. That's 72 major wrecks over 200 years, and 100% of them occurred during the exact hours when conditions would be most dangerous, and when the lighthouse beam would be least likely to be seen by ships at sea. Whitmore examined maritime logs from ships that had successfully navigated the Beacon Island waters. These ships, without exception, had passed the island during daylight hours, or during early evening, when the lighthouse beam was most visible. What Whitmore was beginning to realize was that the Beacon Island wrecks weren't occurring because of the location's inherent danger. They were occurring because of a pattern, a deliberate pattern. Whitmore decided to investigate the lighthouse itself. He traveled to Beacon Island in 1987, right as the lighthouse was being automated. What he found in the lighthouse would change everything. In the lighthouse keeper's quarters, among the personal effects being removed as the family departed, Dr. Whitmore discovered something remarkable. Journals. Not one journal, dozens of them, going back 150 years. The journals were written by different members of the Aldrich family across multiple generations, and they contained detailed records of shipwrecks, salvaged cargo, and something far more disturbing: instructions. One journal, dated 1892, and written in the handwriting of William Aldrich II, contained this passage: "The light must be dimmed during the prescribed hours. Only ships carrying valuable cargo should be affected. The timing of storms provides cover. The rocks do the rest. Father showed me how to identify merchant vessels by their sail patterns. When the conditions are right, when the cargo is valuable, the light is dimmed. The ship founders, the crew drowns, and the cargo washes ashore on our beaches." Another journal, from 1923, written by James Aldrich III. "I have maintained the tradition passed down by my father and his father before him. The light is maintained perfectly during the day. At night, during the prescribed hours, the beam is weakened. Ships that carry valuable cargo, silk, spices, precious metals, jewelry. These ships are more frequent during certain seasons. We wait for these ships. We dim the light, and we wait for the storm that will finish what we have begun. And then, most chillingly, an entry from 1956. Written by Robert Aldrich. My son asks why we do this. I told him what my father told me. We do this because we can, because no one will ever suspect, because the sea keeps its secrets, and because 200 years of precedent proves that the system works. Ships sink, insurance companies pay claims, salvaged cargo becomes our property under salvage rights, and the family prospers. This is not murder. This is business. If you're still watching, you're witnessing one of history's most disturbing conspiracies, confirmed through trial records, servant confessions, and archaeological evidence. If you want to explore more hidden histories, subscribe to Hidden Archives, because what happens next will shock you even more. Understanding how the Lighthouse Keeper conspiracy functioned requires understanding both maritime law and the practical realities of 18th and 19th century shipping. First, maritime salvage rights. Under historical maritime law, anything salvaged from a wreck belonged to the person who salvaged it, unless the original owner could prove ownership and pay salvage fees. For a family living on an island surrounded by wrecks, this meant that valuable cargo washing ashore essentially became their property. Second, lighthouse beam visibility. A lighthouse beam is not infinitely bright. Its visibility depends on weather and atmospheric conditions. By slightly weakening the beam, reducing oil in the lamp, slightly covering the lens, or allowing the light to be partially obscured, a keeper could reduce visibility without making it obviously defective. Third, timing and identification. Merchant ships followed established trade routes. An experienced observer could identify valuable ships by their design and behavior. The Aldrich family kept detailed records of shipping patterns: silk from Asia during summer months, spices during fall, precious metals year-round. Fourth, weather exploitation. Storms were relatively frequent in the waters around Beacon Island. When a valuable ship was identified, when conditions were right, when a storm was developing, the lighthouse beam could be dimmed. The ship, unable to see the light clearly due to weather and reduced visibility, would misjudge its distance from the rocks. The beauty of this system was that every single wreck could be explained as an accident: a ship caught in a storm, a captain who misjudged distance, difficult waters, bad luck. Insurance companies would pay claims, and the salvaged cargo, well, huckles. Salvage law meant the keeper had a legal right to it. The exact moment when James Aldrich, the first lighthouse keeper, realized he could deliberately cause wrecks remains unclear, but his journals provide some insight. One entry dated November 1787 states, "I have observed the waters around the island. Merchant ships pass frequently. Some carry valuable cargo. Last week, a ship carrying spices was wrecked on the rocks. The crew was lost, but the cargo washed ashore. I salvaged what I could according to maritime law. I sold the salvaged spices for £200. This is more than my annual salary as a lighthouse keeper." The entry continues, "I wonder if this is coincidence or opportunity. If the rocks destroy ships regularly, then valuable cargo washes ashore regularly. And if I am the only person living on this island, then I alone have access to this cargo. What if the lighthouse beam occasionally failed? What if, during storms, during dangerous weather, during the hours when the beam matters most, what if it occasionally dimmed?" By December 1787, James had apparently experimented with weakening the beam. An entry states, "I deliberately reduced the lighthouse beam tonight. A merchant vessel passed nearby in fog and rough water. Without a clear beacon, the ship appeared confused in its navigation, but no wreck occurred. The ship passed safely. I learned the beam must be reduced at precisely the right moment. Too early, and the captain will have time to correct. Too late, and the ship will have already safely passed. The timing must be exact. By March 1788, he had apparently perfected the technique. A merchant vessel carrying wine from France passed during the prescribed hours. The beam was reduced as intended. The storm that had been developing all day reached its peak at precisely 3 a.m. The ship struck the rocks. The crew was lost. I could hear their screams from the lighthouse. The cargo washed ashore by morning. Salvage recovery netted approximately £800. This is more than 4 years of my salary. The entry continues matter-of-factly. The ship has been documented as wrecked due to storm conditions and captain error. The insurance investigation concluded that this was an act of nature. The matter is closed. My profit from this harvest, approximately £800. James Aldrich had killed his first ship's crew, and he had gotten away with it. What emerges from the early journals is that James Aldrich seems to have suffered no apparent moral conflict about his actions. He had constructed a narrative in which he was simply an observer, taking advantage of natural circumstances. The fact that he was deliberately engineering those circumstances seems to have been erased from his own moral understanding. This capacity for self-deception became the family inheritance. Each subsequent generation inherited not just the technique, but the psychological framework that allowed them to continue the practice without genuine guilt or remorse. When John Aldrich took over as keeper, his first journal entry demonstrates complete acceptance of the practice. My father has taught me the secret of Beacon Island. Ships wreck, cargo washes ashore, and we prosper. He has shown me how to identify valuable vessels. He has taught me how to recognize the optimal conditions for a wreck. And he has made clear that this is not murder. This is simply understanding how the world works and taking advantage of natural circumstances. John Aldrich's tone is not conflicted. It is matter-of-fact. He has inherited a practice, a technique, and a rationalization. He accepts all three without question. By 1830, when William Aldrich was keeper, the practice had become almost routine. His journals show careful documentation of wrecks, the cargo value, the salvage recovery, the profit margin. But there is no emotional response, no guilt, no hesitation. One particularly detailed entry from 1834 describes the wreck of a merchant vessel carrying silk. The entry documents the silk carrier Mary's Pride was identified 3 weeks ago through our established merchant identification protocol. Cargo value estimated at £3,400. A favorable storm developed Tuesday evening. The beam was reduced to 50% brightness at 2:15 a.m. The ship was approximately 1 mile from the rocks, but could not accurately gauge distance in the fog. By 2:47 a.m., the vessel had struck the primary rock formation. The crew, estimated 48 personnel, drowned during the wreck. Bodies were recovered by morning tide. The cargo reached our beaches within 8 hours. Salvage recovery netted £2,100. Profit margin 62%. This represents excellent yield. The entry is accompanied by a simple notation: successful harvest. The progression across generations is stark. What began as James Aldrich's experimental deliberation, weighing moral questions, deciding on a course of action, has become routine procedure by the third generation. The moral conflict has been entirely erased. The act of deliberately murdering sailors has become merely business. Over 200 years, the Aldrich family systematically recovered and sold valuable cargo from wrecked ships. The journals contain detailed records of sales. 1798, salvaged silk cargo sold for £1,200. 1812, precious metal cargo sold for £3,400. 1834, spice cargo sold for £2,100. 1856, wine cargo sold for £890. 1879, tea cargo sold for £1,650. 1901, jewelry cargo sold for £5,200. 1923, textile cargo sold for £2,300. When the journals were analyzed, the total documented sales came to approximately £287,000, a staggering sum for the era. Historical records show that by the 1850s, the Aldrich family owned 3 houses on the Scottish mainland. By the 1900s, they owned significant agricultural land. By the 1950s, they were investing in stocks and bonds. They sent their children to elite schools. They lived with a level of comfort that far exceeded what a lighthouse keeper's salary could support. Where did this money come from? Official records offer no obvious source, but the journals revealed the answer: the salvaged cargo from 203 people who died when their ships were deliberately sunk. By the early 20th century, ships had begun using mechanical navigational instruments. Compasses, chronometers, and eventually radio navigation made ships less dependent on lighthouse beams for safe passage. Maritime routes changed. Beacon Island became less of a crucial choke point. The final documented wreck involving the Aldrich family occurred in 1952. A merchant vessel carrying textiles was deliberately targeted. The ship sank. The cargo was salvaged, but then the entries become less frequent. By the 1960s, the journals become sporadic. By the 1970s, there's a sense of resignation. An entry from 1976, written by Robert Aldrich. My son has asked that I end the practice. He says the world has changed, that we risk discovery, that maritime authorities are now more thorough in their investigations. I have told him that the practice has sustained our family for nearly 200 years, that to abandon it is to abandon our legacy. But I fear he is correct. The world watches more carefully now. The system that worked for our ancestors will not work for future generations. By 1987, when the lighthouse was automated and the Aldrich family's tenure ended, the conspiracy was already dying. The world had changed, technology had advanced, and perhaps after 200 years, even the family had begun to question what they had become. What's remarkable is that no member of the family ever voluntarily confessed. They simply left the island. They left the journals. They left behind 200 years of evidence. The final significant journal entry comes from Michael Aldrich, the last active lighthouse keeper of the family, dated December 31st, 1986, 1 week before the lighthouse was automated. Michael had never personally participated in any wreck. He was born in 1947, after the conspiracy's effective conclusion in the 1950s. He had inherited the position as lighthouse keeper because it remained a family tradition, even though the original purpose of that family tradition had ended decades before. His final entry reads, "Tomorrow I leave this island. Tomorrow the lighthouse becomes automated. Tomorrow 200 years of family stewardship ends. I have lived my entire life knowing what my great-grandfather and his ancestors did. I have read their journals. I have understood their crimes, and I have chosen silence. This was not courage. It was complicity. My father asked me, near the end of his life, why I never revealed what I knew. He seemed relieved that I had chosen silence, that I had not destroyed the family name. But I think he was mistaken about what I was doing. I was not protecting the family. I was protecting myself, because to reveal the truth would require acknowledging that I am descended from murderers, that I inherited not just a lighthouse, but a legacy of systematic killing. The journals will remain hidden in this lighthouse for as long as the lighthouse stands. Someday, perhaps, someone will find them. Someday, perhaps, the truth will emerge. But I will not be the one to reveal it. I do not have that courage. Or perhaps I have had too much cowardice. I do not ask for forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I simply record this final entry as an acknowledgement. I knew, and I did nothing. Tomorrow, I extinguish the light. Tomorrow, the beacon becomes automatic. Tomorrow, a chapter of history closes. Michael Aldrich left Beacon Island on January 1st, 1987. He lived until 2004, apparently leading a quiet, private life. He gave no interviews, made no public statements, and then the journals were discovered during lighthouse automation. When Dr. Samuel Whitmore presented the journals to maritime authorities, the evidence was overwhelming. The pattern was undeniable. 73 wrecks over 200 years, all between midnight and 4 a.m., all in the same area. The journals provided confessions. The entries detailed the system, the victims, The Prophets. Skeletal remains were found at wreck sites. Cargo fragments were identified and traced to wrecks documented in the journals. The evidence was absolute. But here's what happened next. Nothing. The perpetrators were dead. James Aldrich had died in 1823, John Aldrich in 1856, William Aldrich in 1891, James II in 1927, Robert Aldrich in 1979. Michael Aldrich was still alive, but he had lived his entire life after the conspiracy's effective end and had never himself caused a wreck. What were authorities supposed to do? Prosecute someone for conspiracy when the actual perpetrators were long dead? Pursue legal action against an institution that had unknowingly employed the conspirators? After 18 months of investigation, the British maritime authorities essentially closed the case. Their official statement concluded that, due to the age of the alleged crimes and the death of the primary perpetrators, formal criminal prosecution was not feasible. The Aldrich family received no punishment, no restitution was demanded, no official acknowledgement of wrongdoing was required. What they did receive was historical notoriety. The journals were preserved, the truth was documented, and the lighthouse keeper conspiracy became one of the most studied cases in maritime history. But 203 people remained dead, and no one was ever held accountable. Today, if you visit Beacon Island, you can stand on the rocky shore and see the wreck sites beneath the water. In 2014, maritime archaeologists began systematically exploring the sites. Approximately 56 wrecks have been identified and mapped. Skeletal remains have been recovered and given proper burial. A memorial was erected, listing the names of all 203 victims. The lighthouse itself still stands on the island. It still functions. It still sends its beam out across the waters each night. But now the beam is steady and reliable. Now it is doing what it was always intended to do, saving lives rather than destroying them. The Aldrich family dispersed after 1987. Some members emigrated. Others changed their surnames and attempted to distance themselves from the historical record. Michael Aldrich lived until 2004 and died in relative obscurity, his name known primarily to maritime historians and conspiracy enthusiasts. The journals remain preserved in maritime archives. Students study them, historians debate them, and people continue to ask questions about what happened on Beacon Island during those 200 years. But the most haunting question remains unanswered. How many other conspiracies like this exist in history? How many other families in other places have operated hidden systems of death and profit for generations? How many other killers have hidden in plain sight within roles that society trusts completely? And how many of them are still waiting to be discovered?